They say your best ideas come when no one's watching. For me, it was 11:47 p.m. The janitor had already vacuumed past twice, and my third cup of gas station coffee was bleeding into my chest like battery acid. I was alone in the break room with a half-dead marker and a blueprint that could change everything. Not just for the company, but for me. For once, the noise in my head wasn't about invoices, performance reviews, or why my ex-husband thought a fishing trip was a suitable excuse for missing our daughter's piano recital. It was about this thing I'd sketched, a circuit routing redesign that could cut production costs by 40%, eliminate our top 3 bottlenecks, and simplify thermal load balancing in a way none of our competitors had touched. It wasn't pretty, but it was powerful. And the part that really got me? No one had asked me to do it. I wasn't even supposed to be thinking about it. I was a mid-level systems engineer with just enough seniority to be invisible and just enough experience to know exactly how badly upper management was screwing the pooch. I'd seen the quarterly projections. We were hemorrhaging money like a noseless boxer, and their big idea was team-building pizza Fridays and a rebrand font that looked like Comic Sans took a Xanax. So I stayed late, and I sketched, not out of duty but out of defiance. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Claire, my cubemate, who's usually my built-in moral compass when my brain gets too loud. I just kept building, iterating, drawing lines in red when something felt right and scribbling over them when it didn't. And slowly, painfully, the thing began to breathe. It was elegant in its simplicity, the kind of solution that makes you cuss under your breath the moment it clicks. I knew what I had, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt proud. Quick thing, if you're listening to this and you're in any kind of job where your ideas go unnoticed, hit the like button and subscribe. Not because of the algorithm or any of that BS, but because it shows our little team here that these stories matter. That people like us, people who stay late, who see what others miss, aren't alone in it. 97% of folks who hear this won't ever subscribe. But if you're part of the 3% that does, it means everything. Now back to the wreckage. By sunrise, I had a draft so solid it made my palms sweat. I printed it out on the plotter downstairs, stared at the pages like they might explode, and tucked them into a manila folder like it was a confession letter. This wasn't just a good idea. This was the kind of idea people stole. The kind of idea someone up the chain would slap their name on before you could finish saying, intellectual property. And yet, a sick little voice in the back of my skull whispered, maybe this is it. Maybe this finally gets you seen. So I scheduled a meeting. Marked it, innovation opportunity, urgent. I was stupid enough to be excited. Dressed a little nicer. Did my hair. Brought 2 copies of the draft and 1 for notes. My boss, Jeremy, showed up 5 minutes late, eating a protein bar, eyes glued to his phone. Didn't even sit down. And that, right there, should have been the first red flag. But hope's a stubborn thing that I laid the schematic in front of Jeremy like it was a gift-wrapped grenade. Fragile, dangerous, and entirely capable of rewriting our future. He didn't even glance down, just tore another bite from his protein bar and muttered, "What's this supposed to be?" Mouth full. I still on his damn phone. I took a breath and tried not to snap. It's a thermal routing redesign. If we implement it across the 240 series boards, we could cut down our capacitor load by 38%, eliminate those late-stage failures in QA, and, aha, he interrupted, finally peeling his eyes off his phone. He gave the paper a 2-second once-over like it was a flyer for a missing cat. You made this. I nodded. After hours. For the last 6 weeks. Jeremy let out that managerial half-chuckle, dry, nasal, patronizing. The one that says I already decided you're an idiot and now I get to enjoy it. He pushed the paper back across the desk like it had germs on it. Stick to your duties. Okay? We don't need distractions. I blinked. Thought maybe I misheard. It's not a distraction. It's a solution. This could literally... He raised a hand like a traffic cop. Listen, I get it. You're passionate. But this isn't your lane. If there's a problem worth solving, it'll come from R&D. Not wherever you're sitting these days. I swallowed that burn so hard I swear I could feel it leave a scorch mark all the way down. Before I could gather a reply that didn't involve flipping the desk, the conference room door cracked open. 2 analysts walked in, Kenny and Elena, and caught the tail end of Jeremy's smirk as he said, "Next time you want to invent something, maybe try a whiteboard first." Kenny chuckled. Elena didn't. But that didn't matter. The damage was done. I scooped up the paper and nodded like it didn't sting. Like I hadn't just poured 6 weeks of brain sweat into a pile that got tossed out like a stale donut. The walk back to my desk felt longer than it should have. Everyone avoids eye contact when you've just been made into a punchline. Claire shot me a look, half sympathy, half warning, and slid a sticky note onto my keyboard. "You okay?" I wasn't. Not even close. But that flicker of something else started burning just beneath the shame. Not rage exactly. Not yet. More like insult calcified into resolve. I opened my drawer and stared at the manila folder still in my bag. My name was on every page. My notes. My line work. My damn signature. And I realized they don't get to bury this. Not this time. If they didn't want it under their roof, fine. I take it somewhere it couldn't be stolen. Or worse, claimed by someone who thought thermodynamic load balancing was a character from Star Wars. I closed the folder and booted up my browser. Time to learn how the hell you file a patent when you're a nobody with a budget of -$42 and a gallon of resentment. My kitchen table had seen some things over the years: divorce papers, macaroni art, 2 failed sourdough starters, but never a patent application. Not until that night. I sat there with my laptop, a half-empty glass of boxed cab, and the remains of a grilled cheese that somehow tasted like humiliation. The folder sat beside me, dog-eared and slightly coffee-stained, humming like a live wire, and I started Googling how to file a patent as an individual. Do I need a lawyer for a utility patent? What's the difference between provisional and non-provisional? And why do I suddenly want to scream into a pillow? Turns out, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office does not cater to middle-aged engineers with a mortgage, a kid in braces, and 0 free time. It was like learning another language, except the alphabet was just fees and forms and threat of rejection. There were filing categories, drawings that had to follow specific formats, claims written in legalese that could be interpreted 6 different ways depending on which corporate vulture wanted to steal your soul that week. I kept reading and reading. Then I started taking notes. By midnight, I had a checklist. By 2 a.m., I had a budget spreadsheet with more red than a horror movie. Filing alone with no lawyer was doable, barely. But I'd have to delay the transmission rebuild on the Subaru. Cancel Taylor's birthday weekend. Dip into the emergency fund labeled root canals and existential crises. Was it worth it? I looked at that folder again. Then back at my email, where Jeremy's smug thanks, but no thanks reply still sat unread, bold, like a bruise. "Stick to your duties," he'd said. Fine, I would. Plus a little extra. My duty, apparently, now included safeguarding the one goddamn thing I'd built that wasn't tainted by office politics or someone else's ego. If that meant learning patent law by osmosis and living on canned soup for a month, so be it. I wasn't even thinking about revenge. Not yet. This was defense. Territory. You don't put your name on a flag just to wave it around. You stake it in the dirt and dare someone to pull it up. By sunrise, I'd found a patent lawyer who offered 1-hour consultations for a reduced rate. I booked it. Took the day off work using one of those mental health days they only pretend to encourage. Told Claire I had a migraine, which wasn't entirely a lie. The bitterness had settled in my chest like old smoke, but it was the clarity that surprised me most. I wasn't doing this to prove Jeremy wrong. I was doing it because someone like him would never believe I could. That's what made it worth doing. Quiet resolve is a funny thing. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It just acts. And in that moment, bleary-eyed, broke, and barely holding myself together, I knew exactly what I had to do next. The invoice hit harder than I thought it would. $1,420.67. That was the total, down to the penny, after filing fees, lawyer consult, and the formatting specialist I found through some sketchy Reddit thread who only accepted Zelle and sent his drafts at 3 a.m. I stared at the charge on my banking app like it was a threat. My savings balance blinked back at me, lower than it had been since the year my water heater exploded and the cat needed emergency surgery within the same week. But it was done. The moment the confirmation email came in, I froze. Subject line, USPTO receipt, application received. I clicked it. Read it 5 times. My name. My address. My damn schematic. The one they laughed at. Filed. Time-stamped. Locked in. Mine. I didn't cry, but my eyes did that weird thing where they go glassy without permission, like they're about to hold a meeting you weren't invited to. I shut the laptop and just sat there, palms flat against the fake wood table, trying to remember how to breathe like a person who hadn't just risked their daughter's dental work on a long shot, because that's what it was. A long, expensive, exhausting shot in the dark. I'd filed under my personal name, not the company's. That wasn't revenge. That was insurance. They'd refused to even consider the idea. Legally, ethically, emotionally, it was mine. Filing it under their name would have required their consent, and Jeremy had made it loud and clear I was just a tech support monkey with a pretty diagram and too much time on her hands. So now it sat, legally protected, for at least a year under provisional status while I figured out how the hell to fund the full patent process. But the seed was planted. The box was checked. The gun was loaded. And still, paranoia scratched at me like a raccoon behind drywall. What if I missed something in the claims language? What if the formatting guy ghosted me and inserted some clause that let him sell the rights to Amazon? What if Jeremy did see potential in the design and decided to beat me to the punch? I hadn't told anyone, Claire included. That meant no alibis, no backup, no witnesses. I double-checked the digital receipt, printed out a hard copy, and stuffed it in an envelope marked Emergency Legal, which I tucked behind the furnace panel in my basement. Not dramatic, just cautious. That's what happens when you've lived through corporate gaslighting and a custody battle. You learn how to hide the good stuff. The next few weeks passed in a haze of normalcy so oppressive it felt unnatural. Jeremy never mentioned the design again. Meetings went on, full of acronyms and half-baked pivot plans and whiteboard scribbles that looked like a toddler's depiction of capitalism. But I watched, and I waited, and every time someone said the word innovation or next-gen redesign, I felt my pulse tap against my collarbone like a ticking clock. The patent wasn't revenge. Not yet, but it was a match, and they had just started pouring gasoline. The email said mandatory attendance in bold red font, like we were all about to get audited by the IRS. Friday, 3 p.m. Town hall in the main auditorium, with exciting updates from leadership, which, in corporate dialect, usually meant someone was about to get laid off while the rest of us got cupcakes and a LinkedIn-ready soundbite about resilience. But this time there was a DJ. I swear to God. They hired a goddamn DJ to spin house music in the lobby while we filed in like cattle, clutching branded stress balls and smiling for selfies under a balloon arch that read, Ignite 2.0. I found a seat in the back corner, behind a support beam, where I could see everything and be seen by no one. Claire waved from 5 rows up but didn't try to join me. Smart woman. She knew I'd been riding a weird edge lately, ever since Jeremy stopped looking me in the eye in meetings. Then the lights dimmed. The projector screen lit up with a flashy title slide, Project Halcyon. The future starts here. Cue applause. The CEO, Ronnie, the kind of man who'd never used a screwdriver but owned 3 Teslas, strode out like he was at a TED Talk. Today, he said, we unveil the result of 9 months of relentless innovation. 9 months. I did the math in my head and nearly laughed out loud. That was exactly 1 month after I filed. The slides rolled. The crowd oot. And there it was. My design. My routing solution. My entire thermodynamic load balancing architecture. Dressed up in prettier graphics. Renamed with corporate fluff, but structurally identical. Down to the damn capacitor orientation I'd fought myself over for 2 straight weekends. They had taken it. And not just taken it, polished it. Repackaged it as the company's next billion-dollar product. A modular board line meant to revolutionize compact system efficiency. And they were calling it an in-house collaborative breakthrough. The gall. Jeremy stood near the front, nodding along like a proud father at a graduation ceremony. I could almost see the pitch deck in his head. Investors, profits, keynote invites, maybe even a podcast appearance. All built on the bones of the thing he'd called a distraction. The applause started slow, then swelled as they unveiled the prototype. It was real. It was happening. They'd skipped R&D entirely and jumped straight to fabrication. I didn't clap. I just sat there, still as stone, while my heart jackhammered against my ribs. Not with fear, not even anger, amusement, because I had the timestamp, the file, the envelope behind my furnace. And they had no clue the ground they were standing on was already legally marked. They thought they were announcing a product. But really, they were lighting the fuse point 2 weeks after the town hall. The entire building was vibrating with urgency. Emails flew like shrapnel. Subject lines screamed, "All hands, priority escalation," and my personal favorite, "Halcyon is go for launch." The factory floor was pulling double shifts. Engineering teams were getting pizzas at midnight, and marketing had practically moved into the war room with whiteboards layered in color-coded jargon like go-to-market synergy and Q3 vertical leverage. Translation: they were all in. It was chaos. Beautiful, arrogant, fast-moving chaos. And I watched it unfold like someone who knew exactly when the brakes were going to fail. I started spotting fragments of my design in places I wasn't supposed to see them. Mock-ups taped to whiteboards, stress test diagrams in hallway printouts, internal memos discussing thermal consistency in near-identical phrasing to the documentation I'd submitted months ago in my provisional application. I even found a slide in the dev team's shared folder that was, word for word, lifted from my schematics annotation notes. They didn't even bother rewriting it. The thing that struck me wasn't how blatant it was how comfortable they felt doing it. No one had asked where the design came from. No one seemed worried about patents or permissions or legal vetting. The arrogance was baked in like mold under tile. One afternoon, I passed the executive lounge on my way to refill my coffee. The door was cracked, just enough to hear Jeremy's voice. "We cut out the middleman," he said, chuckling. "She doesn't even know. Probably still thinks we passed on it." Another voice, Ronnie, the CEO. "It's clean, right? No red tape." "Clean as a whistle," Jeremy replied. "We tweaked enough details. Legally, we're good. She'll never know the difference." I didn't stop walking. I didn't burst in or scream or flip the Keurig machine. I just kept moving, coffee in hand. But my stomach turned ice cold. Because now it was official. They weren't just using my design. They were betting the company on it, and betting I wouldn't do a damn thing. What they didn't know was that I'd already done the thing. Months ago. The patent was still in provisional status, but every piece of that architecture was time-stamped, filed, and protected. My lawyer had already confirmed it. Substantially identical replication would be enough for an injunction. And they were printing it on posters. The marketing budget alone could have paid off my mortgage. They had press kits, trade show bookings, influencer deals. Every step they took dug the hole deeper. And me? I was no longer angry. I was no longer nervous. I was calm, because I knew exactly when and how to pull the trigger. And watching them pour millions into building their empire on my foundation, it was like watching a house go up in flames, holding the only fire extinguisher, and waiting. The cease and desist went out on a Tuesday morning, 9:01 a.m. sharp. My lawyer, a steel-nerved woman named Victoria who spoke in measured syllables like every word was a gavel strike, CC'd me on the email. Subject line: Notice of Intellectual Property Infringement. Patent application #6281XXXX. Attached were the documents. The provisional patent, the side-by-side comparisons, the annotated designs, and one very polite, but unmistakably lethal, warning that any further production would constitute willful infringement punishable by federal statute. I stared at the email like it was a confession written in reverse. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, trembling just enough to feel real. Then I closed the laptop, stood, poured myself a cup of tea, and waited. It took less than 30 minutes for the ripple to hit the factory floor. I was in the break room pretending to microwave oatmeal when the first alert buzzed across the overhead paging system. Production hold, line 3. All supervisors report to compliance immediately. Line 3 was Halcyon's line. By 10:17, the plant manager's office door slammed hard enough to make the fire extinguisher rattle on the wall. 2 project leads were pacing the floor outside legal like their shoes were on fire. I strolled past the open design lab and caught sight of Jeremy on the phone. jaw clenched, one hand gripping his temple like he was trying to physically hold his skull together. Who the hell filed this? I heard him snap. Are we sure she didn't loop this through someone else? No. I'm asking if we can bury it. He stopped talking the moment he saw me. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I just nodded, slow and surgical, and kept walking. 10 minutes later, every halcyon unit on the floor was powered down. Parts sat mid-assembly. Conveyor belts froze in place. Factory workers stood idle while managers whispered in hallways, shuffling legal pads like gamblers down to their last chips. By noon, someone from corporate sent out a temporary operations pause memo citing unexpected compliance clarification needs, which is code for, we stepped on a landmine and didn't even know it was there until the leg was gone. I ate my oatmeal at my desk in silence, rereading the cease and desist and letting the satisfaction bloom like a slow exhale. They had taken what I built. They had laughed, dismissed, patronized, and steamrolled. And now they were cornered by the very thing they refused to take seriously. Stick to your duties, Jeremy had said. Well, I did. And now their million-dollar rollout was stuck in legal limbo while my name sat glowing on every email thread they forwarded to compliance. Funny how fast the tone changes when the middleman turns out to be holding the detonator to BY Wednesday morning. The building felt like a sinking ship dressed in business casual. You could smell the panic. No more pump-up music in the lobby. No more donut carts or branded coffee sleeves. Just strained silence broken by the squeak of expensive shoes pacing between boardrooms. HR canceled all non-essential meetings. Compliance locked their doors. And Jeremy? He hadn't been seen since his office blinds snapped shut at 8:43 a.m. like a casket lid. I wasn't looped into anything officially, of course. But when you've spent a decade quietly making yourself indispensable, the walls tend to talk. Claire slid me a post-it around 10:15 that simply read, "They're screwed." She didn't need to elaborate. Apparently, the legal team had done a deep dive overnight, combing through every version of the Halcyon design chain, every timestamp, every contributor. And when they reached my original schematic, pulled from a version control server they forgot to scrub, they saw it. My initials, my comments, my code snippets, my fingerprints all over the damn thing. And then they saw the patent, the filed patent, in my name. I wasn't just some disgruntled engineer with a grudge. I was the legal owner of the technology their golden goose was laying eggs on. And now they'd printed brochures, ordered parts from overseas, promised performance specs to investors, all without securing the rights. By noon, the rumor mill hit a fever pitch. Ronnie, the CEO, had flown back early from a tech summit in Denver. He went straight from the airport to an emergency executive meeting, dragging behind him a suitcase and a face like a man walking into a firing squad. I passed him in the hallway. He didn't even look up. Jeremy tried to spin it at first. Word was, he called it a clerical misunderstanding. But legal shut that down quick. The cease and desist wasn't vague. It wasn't conditional. It cited U.S. statute, cited my provisional filing date, cited their lack of written consent. The verdict was simple. Any use of my design going forward constituted willful infringement, and investors were pissed. 3 calls were scheduled with the board. 2 got canceled last minute when a major stakeholder demanded a legal clarification in writing before further funding. Claire overheard someone in accounting mutter the word restructuring. That's when the fear finally broke through the arrogance. I caught Jeremy in the hallway late that afternoon, looking like someone had drained the blood from his face with a syringe. He saw me, and for the first time in his smug, blustering life, he didn't speak. He just nodded, slow, stiff, hollow, and kept walking. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the crack in the armor, the first tremor before the collapse. And I knew exactly what was coming next. They held the emergency board meeting on Friday. No fanfare, no catered lunch. Just grim faces behind closed doors and a security guard outside the conference room like they expected someone to throw a chair. By then, the factory floor had gone cold. Halcyon's production line, once the crown jewel of the company's innovation rebrand, was frozen mid-assembly. Half-constructed modules stacked like tombstones in silence. Machinery powered off, supervisors whispering in corners. At 3:12 p.m., I received an email from the company's legal department. No subject line in all caps. No veiled threats. Just a PDF attachment titled, Proposal for Partnership Licensing, Patent # 6281 XXXX. The tone was apologetic, almost reverent. We recognize your proprietary rights. We would like to explore a mutually beneficial agreement. A formal partnership may serve both parties' long-term interests. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. They wanted me now, not as an employee, not as a subordinate, as a patent holder, as the single person who could resurrect their dead product line. I printed the letter, folded it neatly, took it home, and the next morning, I walked into Victoria's office, my lawyer, the one who'd seen this coming all along, and we drafted the terms. I wouldn't sell. I wouldn't give them ownership. I'd license the design, on my terms, with royalties, with naming rights, with my name etched into every technical document, every prototype, every damn press release from now until their last breath. And I made sure Jeremy's department would pay double for the privilege. That afternoon, I signed the deal on her oak conference table, pen gliding like a scalpel across the page. My hand didn't shake. My heart didn't race. Just clean, clear satisfaction, like exhaling something I'd held in for years. At the same time, back at HQ, the board adjourned in tense silence. Halcyon's relaunch was postponed indefinitely. Production remained halted. Jeremy, from what I heard, was quietly reassigned special projects, which we all knew meant he'd be gone before the quarter closed. I went home, opened a beer, sat in my garage with the overhead light humming above and the original schematic pinned to the corkboard in front of me. And I thought about that moment, months ago, when Jeremy looked me in the eye, smirking like a man allergic to humility, and said, "Just stick to your duties." Turns out, my duties included making sure they couldn't steal from me.